Hello everybody. I'm very pleased to be in front of the camera once again. As time goes past, and I know I said this before, I wanted to be able to do videos more on a regular basis, but it's already been a month now, and you can't put a brake on time. Time seems to just pass us by, and it doesn't wait for anybody. And I wanted to do some things with John. We wanted to go up to Highgate, and we still haven't managed to go to Highgate to do a video on Karl Marx. But we did go into London, and we went on one of the tours, the Karl Marx tour. It was bitterly cold. It was very, very cold. And my friend John, it sort of went over his head, some of what the tour guide was saying. But I'm glad I did it. The only downside, I must admit, is when we weren't allowed into the British Library. The British Library is the reading rooms where Karl Marx would study and read for 30 years, and unfortunately we were unable to go inside because I had my wheelie suitcase with me, and they don't allow wheelie suitcases. And they said if you can park it, but it will cost you £6. And I thought, just for 20 minutes to pay £6 is a bit steep, so we chose not to go into the British Museum. But I have a book here on Karl Marx. This book is one of the few that I found. Actually, I've got another one, but this is the biography. I've got two two that are made specifically or written specifically for London. One's a real tour guide, because it actually tells you all the locations of where he lived and where he met with his other political friends, and the hotels that he stayed in, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, like I said, we wanted to go up there to do our own video, but it's just getting the time, because my friend John, his father's not doing very well, and he has to go down to Wiltshire to meet him, to see him, just to give him moral support. And so we just haven't had the time to actually do a film on Karl Marx. But having said all that, that's why I decided to do this video presentation, and to bring out some more books that I've got as a reference to Berlin, which is pretty much why I've decided to do this video presentation. Okay. Now, this is a book that I showed before, Tragedy and Hope. This was from my last video presentation, and yeah, it still hasn't been read, as you can quite understand and fathom. But I wanted to bring this book out to show it to you guys again, because this book was his follow-up. This is the Anglo-American Establishment. This is the book that he wrote in 1949. He completed it in 1949, but he decided against publishing it for the fear of what the elites might do to him if he were to publish it. So this wasn't published until after his death. It's a curious story as to how it actually got round to being published. The publisher of this particular book only gave a brief description, I think, of meeting the author, and then but deciding against publishing it while the author was alive, for fear of what the elites might do to Carroll Quigley, the author. So it wasn't published until after Quigley passed on. This is a lot less to read than the Tragedy in Hope book, but I think in order to get the best out of these books is to read them in order. So it might be a good idea to read this book first before actually taking on the Tragedy in Hope book. But as you can see, that's the picture of the author just there. So this is a valuable book, especially when you want to know about geopolitics of the last century and the understanding of geopolitics today. Okay, so when doing my own research, I wanted to talk about the start of the First World War, but consequently I'm having to go back further to about 1891, and this is where Cecil Rhodes' cabal wanted to do everything that he possibly could in maintaining the British Empire and also the control of the shipping lanes and effectively the control of the world. This is how they thought at the end of the 1891, and then he passed on, I think, in 1902. So I have to go back further, say to the early 1900s to 1914 to actually know exactly how the First World War started. And the First World War literally shapes the rest of the century, I believe, because it had the First World War not taken place, I don't think we would have had the type of world that we recognise when we look back on history in the last 100 years. The First World War really had a humongous and overwhelming influence on the rest of the world. And not just that, but because of the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu came about in 1919, and it was a pandemic that affected the whole world. It's a bit like the COVID. But in 1919, there's more people died as a consequence of the pandemic, the Spanish flu, than soldiers during the First World War, which is astounding. But there were several volumes of this book. This is going from 1900 to 1914, and then this one goes from 1914 to 1918, and then this one goes from 1919 to 1939. So the First World War really had a profound effect on the lives of all the citizens in Europe, certainly, but around the world, and the pandemic itself. And yet we don't really hear much about the pandemic. In fact, I've got a book on it, I haven't brought it with me, called Pale Rider, and it goes into a lot of detail and depth as to the causes and effects of the pandemic when it came into being, and everybody was affected by it. And this was that. Can you imagine, after 4 years of this dreadful war, only to have this massive, great big pandemic, and yet it hardly gets spoken about, only almost in passing, and consequently as a result of the COVID that we've experienced in the last 4 or 5 years or so. Anyway, so the eventful century, the 20th century, the fragile peace. Okay, so I have a book here that I'm in the middle of reading. It's called Berlin, 1914 to, beg your pardon, from 1945 to 1953. So 1945 to 1953. This is the German copy. This is the English copy. So let's see. There we are. Now, Kurt Reese is an American author, and here I am reading a German translation. So what I'm doing is, because my German isn't as good as my English, I have to read this in conjunction with this book. This is the English version, in order for me to get all the details. Now, this book is quite eye-opening. The level of suffering by the Berliners after the Second World War is I mean, tragic. Even the guns and the bombs fell silent. They still had to survive on ration coupons, on the destruction of the city. So people needed homes, and of course there aren't any. You know, they were living in cellars. They were living in bombed out buildings where part of the rooms are totally destroyed, and so only half of the building is like eligible for anybody to live in. And so in effect living in derelicted buildings. So there was hardly any electricity, gas, you know, telephone lines, water. There was a shortage of everything, and the biggest difficulty of all is to keep warm, because they had some terrible winters of 1945, I believe, 1946, even into 1947. There were some really, really tough winters that the Berliners suffered as a consequence of the cold. So they had to try, and they were cutting down trees and furniture. They said that when they went into people's homes, they hardly had any furniture because they used it. They used it to the furniture to burn, to keep warm. The other thing they often did was to actually lie in bed, just to keep as much body heat under the covers as they could. There were those that actually suffered so badly that they passed away, or they were very ill and they needed to go into hospital. And suicides continued. So they had a lot of suicides during the war, and the fear of what the Russians might do once the Russians entered the city. And then after the war, the aftermath of the war, there was still suicides. There's a continuation of suicides. I mean, it was really grim. And then the black market played such an incredible role on everybody, because everybody needed to live and to survive, and cigarettes was a currency that was priceless. So a lot of Americans did very well at the black market because they had so many cigarettes that they were able to bring over from the United States, and that was a currency. And there were a lot of people that were selling whatever they could. So say, for example, if you had antiques, you know, you had jewelry, you had all kinds of, you know, paintings or whatever it is that you could sell. And a lot of these valuable items were being sold cheaply to those that had the money to pay. And so it was really a day-to-day survival. The various stories that I'm reading in this book, for example, children that had no parents because they either lost their parents as a result of the war, or because they lost contact, or they moved from the city to a town or village, and there was no more. It wasn't as though that you could pick up your mobile phone and give them a call. So there were a lot of children that were surviving amongst themselves, a kind of a Lord of the Flies type of thing. And then they would steal and loot as best they could in order to live and survive amongst the rubble and the ruins of Berlin. I've heard some incredible stories. When I say I heard, through reading this book, that children were going missing, and the children were never being found. And this is a hard thing for me to say, but I suspect it's true, where these children were being murdered and their flesh was being sold and put into sausage meat, made as sausage meat. Now, if you know anything about paedophilia or something, you know, or what we call wrong-uns, or people that seem to have this macabre pleasure in having, you know, sexual relations with a child. This kind of thing goes on where part of this practice is that of actually murdering a child. So I don't doubt it, and this book was published like in the early 50s, so you can imagine how controversial and difficult this is, the kind of thing that you would read. And even if you read it, you wouldn't want to believe it. But this is the kind of thing that I've been coming across in this book. So anyway, getting off that topic, because it is uncomfortable talking about it. This is the kind of things that were going on during those times. And when you're at year zero, as they called it, Stunde Null, where there's chaos, there's desperation, there's a city that's completely destroyed or almost completely destroyed, where law and order is broken down, the system of the ideology of the Nazi era has come to an end. The occupation of the Allies and the Russians over the city and over Germany takes its toll. So this is something that I'm trying to find out a lot more about. There are books out there that I've yet to read and yet to discover, to find out more exactly what were the causes of the aftermath of World War II. But when you read books like this, you start to see things that you never saw before, and one of them is the children that are going missing during the after the consequences of World War II. Okay, so let me see. Now, when you start to look into Berlin histories, like I do, you come across books that you don't often find, or at least they're not always. You wouldn't expect to see a book written about it. This is about the cultural and intellectual life of Berlin, 1945 to 1948. So it's the very years that I'm interested in. When a society is almost broken down as completely as what's happened to the Berliners during after the Second World War. You're looking for a recovery, and one of the things that helps the people to lift their spirits and their morale is the theatre, is the cinema, is museums opening up, is the zoo, is radio, is music, and so on and so forth, and also the intellectual, you know, the universities, so that people would want to go back to into the universities to study for a degree or a diploma or something like that, and to have a qualification of being a doctor or a lawyer or a dentist or an engineer. This is what's really needed, because after Germany was divided, you had East Germany and West Germany. A lot of people were fleeing from East Germany into West Germany, simply because the prospects of finding a decent job and being paid a decent wage is far greater than it is in the East. And this was one of the problems that the East German state were facing. They were losing, or they were having a brain drain. So there was a lot of people were leaving East Germany for West Germany, and this was causing a problem. Hence, they had to do something about it, and the only way to save the state effectively was to build the Berlin Wall. But the seeds of this problem began just after the war, when Russia were making it very, very difficult for those that were living on the eastern side of the city to get their education, or to improve the lives of the people in such a way to make things a little bit more bearable. Because if you can imagine the destruction of a city, it's going to take time to rebuild. It's going to take time to clear away the rubble. It's going to take time. And if this is all that you can see, so day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, you want to look for a better life. So you want to flee the city. You want to be able to start afresh, start anew. And if you can do that with a decent qualification that you've got from a university, then a lot of young people were doing this. But if they were all moving away from Eastern Germany into Western Germany, then you're going to have problems in saving the state. That's the East German state. So a book like this is quite valuable for me, because it's not something that I went out of my way to buy. It just so happened that when I ordered this book, did I see exactly what this book is about. So at least the angle of it is very good and unique. So I'm glad to say I have it, and it's part of my my Berlin collection. And at some point, I will definitely read it and study it. Let me see. So a lot of so if I go back a little bit, I've got a book here called The Berlin Diaries of Marie Vassilchikov. So Vassiltchikov. This is a book that I found out in the wild, that I got in London. I think, let me see if there's a picture of her. There she is. So it's a really beautiful woman. And this reminds me of a book by Christian Bielenberg called The Past is Myself. And why I've brought this book and why I want to talk about it, it's simply because a lot of books that are written after the war are memoirs. And so when you write a memoir, it's a question of what you can actually remember, and your thoughts and your emotions and your perceptions will have altered after the war than during the war. Now, this is a diary. So this was written at the time as it was happening, when the bombs were falling all over Berlin, when the Nazis were rounding people up, were rounding up the Jews and so on and so forth, when the rations were becoming tighter and tighter, where the food wasn't as plentiful as it once was before the war. And you have to make the best with the circumstances and the situations that you find yourself in. So when you come across a book like this is quite valuable, and certainly it's valuable to me. because relying on memoirs doesn't give you a clear picture of what it was to be in Berlin during World War II. But if you get to read books such as this, which is actual diaries, then you'll get a deeper understanding and a clearer picture of what occurred at the time. I want to get more books that are of personal recollections by those that actually survived the war. There were civilians during the war. They weren't so much soldiers, they were civilians in Berlin, as it was at that time, because their recollections are that much more priceless than a memoir. So a book like this, I've had this for quite a while. I haven't got round to reading it yet. I mean, because there are so many other books that I have, like that Chris Kurt Reese book, which is I'm in the middle of, in the process of actually reading. But books such as these, I seek out simply because of the fact that they wrote the diary each day, as opposed to a recollection, say 3 or 4 or 5 years later after the fact. So this is priceless. After the war, or during the war, there was a chap called Lord Haw Haw. His name's William Joyce, and Margaret Joyce. Now Margaret Joyce was his wife, and William Joyce was an American. He wasn't British. You'd think he was British, but he wasn't. He was an American. And after the war, they found him, and they took him to London, where they hung him. And yet his wife was just as guilty as he was, and she got off scot-free. So when I got this book, it was a surprise to me, because I read it. I didn't read every word in the book, because I'd like to do a standalone video presentation on Lord Haw Haw. But yeah, he was quite a character, and he was propagating propaganda during the course of the war. But why they were so determined to hang him, I won't know until I've actually read this book. So yeah, Lord Haw Haw, interesting character. Let's see. Another interesting character, George Blake. This is George Blake, who escaped from Wormwood Scrubs, I think in 1966 or 1967. Don't know too much about him, other than he was a spy for the KGB, and he told the KGB about the tunnel that the West were digging under Berlin, from West Berlin into East Berlin, to listen in on the phone lines of the Russian communications, and they were very successful in doing this. They didn't want to. The KGB didn't want to say anything for about 18 months for fear of exposing George Blake. So, and then it was only after did they decide to expose the tunnel to the press, and there was a bit of a drama for the whole tunnel, and it was shown all around the world of what the Americans and the British were up to under the ground, under the soil of Berlin. But George Blake, he was convicted, and he was sent to Wormwood Scrubs. Now he managed to get out of Wormwood Scrubs, and it was a comedy of errors. There was a lot of things gone wrong, and but somehow through the bungling it and these having luck on your side, because if you have luck on your side, you know, you can make lots and lots of mistakes and still get away with it. And George Blake managed to do it, and they managed to get him into East Berlin, and the KGB were astounded at the fact that he actually escaped. Now, I think there's a lot more to the story than I can actually explain now, because this book is one of the reasons why, to give a clearer picture and understanding as to the escape and how they actually got around to having a successful escape from Wormwood Scrubs by George Blake. But yeah, it really is an eye-opener, and I'm glad that I've got this book. So we're going to do a presentation on George Blake, as I'm sure I've already mentioned before. Okay, we've got something on. I've been seeing on YouTube that they're doing a remake of The Day of the Jackal, which was a great Frederick Forsyth story. It was made into a film that we all know of, Edward Fox, and they, you know, that famous scene in the film when Edward Fox blows up. He fires his specially made rifle in the woods at a watermelon, and then the watermelon blows up, and everybody remembers that scene. Well, they're doing a remake, but this time they're doing a series, and it's called obviously it's Day of the Jackal. But I was wondering, because that film came out in 1974, that this guy, Carlos the Jackal. And I was thinking, well, I wonder if they took the name Jackal and gave it to Carlos. That, you know, so it's a bit like Jack the Ripper and the Yorkshire Ripper, where they would take the name Ripper and they would attach it to someone else. Well, I believe they've done that with Carlos, and they call him Carlos the Jackal. Now, Carlos the Jackal was a notorious terrorist during the 70s. And in the 80s, I believe, as well, who who kidnapped a whole lot of people from OPEC, and it was his most successful and daring attempt, and he managed to escape from Vienna, and it was so successful that it was actually all filmed. And I actually remember at the time when they were, and this was in 1975, where they were squeegeeing blood off the floor in Schwechat Airport, and how the Prime Minister at the time was criticised for actually shaking his hand. Well, eventually they did catch him, and you're sort of thinking, well, what's this got to do with Berlin? Well, the fact is, a lot of these terrorists, the Stasi were protecting. A lot of those from the Baader-Meinhof gang were hiding in East Germany. And they were getting protected by the Stasi. And after the wall came down, obviously the Stasi could no longer protect them, because they'd already disbanded, and they were able to capture a lot of these terrorists. And one of the problems that they had was. They would get a lighter sentence if they actually gave the names of other terrorists that they were after, and some were able to do this and others just couldn't do it, so that they had to stay longer in jail as a consequence of not being able to tell on their colleagues. But Carlos the Jackal, he wasn't. It wasn't like he was. Captured in East Germany. He was captured in Sudan. They managed to catch him in Sudan. Now, I don't know how, because I'd like to give a dedication to Carlos the Jackal because of his connection to the Stasi. So to talk about a presentation that I would like to do a deep dive on Carlos the Jackal. But yeah, it was in Sudan where they caught him, and it was only through an operation where they effectively kidnapped him, put him on a plane and flew him to Paris. But I never thought that there was that connection with Carlos the Jackal and Berlin, when clearly there is. So Carlos the Jackal is a very unique and charismatic character who would like to do a lot more research on, to actually give a really good presentation on his operations and the kind of man that he once was. I don't even know if he's still. I think he's still in a French jail, but I don't know if he will ever be put on parole, because I think there were too many people that he killed in Paris and around the world, where they would ever decide to release a man such as him. But yeah, Carlos the Jackal, a very, very interesting subject to discuss. Okay, so I've got various books here that I want to show, principally more for their pictures rather than anything else. Now, when the Berlin Wall came down, it was a very, very historic time for Berlin, Berlin history, European history and world history. And anybody with a camera who took lots and lots of pictures will have something so significant and historic that it's worth discussing. So I've got a picture here just outside the Brandenburg Gate, and as you can see, the Berlin Wall here, where all these border guards are standing on top of the Berlin Wall. Now, this part of the wall was a bit shorter than other parts of the Berlin Wall, and this is almost like a tank barrier, as it was, so that you couldn't. It would be very, very difficult to actually get through this part of the wall. So you'd probably want to miss this part and go somewhere else in order for you know, to get to the other side. But but the Berlin Wall was really not so much for people, from outsiders to get into East Berlin, but from those on the inside wanting to get out. But then if you can see this photo here, and then you see this photo here, and you see the differences between the two photographs. You see a lot more border guards, almost shoulder to shoulder, and here they're more spread out. So you can see the differences in time when these photos were taken, and also the graffiti in the bottom is different. It's a very telling photograph, as I would say, because sadly I'd lost my own photographs that I took when the Berlin Wall was up, and I took many photographs only for them to lose them when I put them up in the attic, and I had there was a torrential downpour, and a lot of those photos that I took tragically were destroyed. Here's another photo, so photo reportage, and now we have civilians on top of standing on top of the Berlin Wall, as opposed to, say, that photo there. See, so these photographs is something that I want to get more into. Is actually the collection of photos, to actually be able to see what the difference is, and maybe even know when these photographs were taken, because the more you find out about these things, the deeper an understanding that you have of actually what went on. So it's not always reported by film crews or you know, documentary makers or news bulletins and news presenters, because they always like to give a kind of an angle or a perception of what reality is, and it might not be as you would see it if you were there yourself, if that makes any sense. And here we have this is another book principally on photographs. This is what I like. I love this photo here of this elderly lady with the turbant, and I mean, it must be, you know, as time is passing by her, and she probably doesn't know what's hit her, because now the whole regime has changed. Everything is going to come to an end as what she'd recognised it for the past 28 years when the wall was up, and all of a sudden the wall is gone, and it's almost like, you know, what's happened? What do I do now? You know, it's amazing how change, how profound a change like that, how it can that you can have on by the fact that that a regime has now ended. So here's another photo of the border guards, where the part of the wall is open. You know, when you ask yourself, how long will I be in this job? You know, as a border guard, because now my services are no longer required. This is something I often saw, and even as late as the 80s and 90s, where I'd see these bare walls. There was a lot of these bare walls that I got to see when I was in Berlin. You know, it was something that always fascinated me, because my perception is that because those buildings were damaged, they would just clear away the damaged building, and any building that was undamaged, they just left it the way it is, and hence why you always get to see these bare walls. This is a great photo of the old East Berlin. I love this photograph. This is interesting. This is the Berliner Bank, where they're all queuing up, and this is the East Germans, because what they wanted to do, you had the old East German mark and you had the West German mark, and the East German mark wasn't really worth that much, and because the regime has now come to an end, it isn't worth anything. And so what you could do is you could go to the bank and you could change it for a West German mark. So it's one East German mark for one West German mark. And it's, you know, exchanging something that's worthless for something that's worth some money. And there were a lot of people that became very rich as a result of this exchange. Now here's the other side of the Brandenburg Gates, where you can actually see the border guards. And I mean, what must have this been like to the border guards, because their job is to actually patrol the wall and not let anybody escape. And now the whole regime is coming to an end, and that the wall is now opened up. I mean, what do you do? What are your thoughts? I'd love to know what a border guard actually thought of at that time. You know, if there were any border guards that actually write a book after the fall of the Berlin Wall. This is a photograph that I really, really like. So you see the wall, and this is I think this is the inner part of the wall, and as you can see, it's all white. It's all painted white. If you see it from the western side, you'd see all graffiti, and they would have whitewashed these walls only for the graffiti artists to come back again and start, you know, putting all their tags and their murals. They would paint these murals on the walls, but here you actually see them white, and the reason being is that, so if anybody tried to breach the wall, it would be whoever got over the wall would be an easy target for the border guard to shoot at. So that's hence why the wall is white. And I think you've got here, it's a great photo of an East German border guard with somebody with a spray can, you know, to spray that, you know, to do some more graffiti on the wall. But yeah, so that pretty much concludes my my video presentation. I really was sort of winging this this one because I really didn't have a theme that I wanted to cover, but I was thinking of stick, and I was thinking of putting some more videos on, and it was a month when I did my last one, so I'm really pleased that I've actually got something to post, and Shane's here, he's actually gonna post this up for me, so auf Wiedersehen.